So my name is Paula Hannaford-Agor. I'm the director of the Center for Jury Studies at the National Center for State Courts, and today we're just going to be talking about juror orientation. And I wanted to just start out with, why do we do juror orientation? What's the point? Don't we all know enough? Don't people actually know enough about what jury service is that we can sort of conveniently not spend a lot of time? I saw a hand up over here. Sir?
Yeah.
Come by with a mic.
Use the mic, right?
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is George, from Liberia, West Africa. Court settings are not really very friendly to the first user. And for a juror who goes to court, must have some idea what he expects or what she expects in the courtroom. So jury orientation should get us some idea what they expect to see in the court, and so they can prepare them for the unseen, because a lot of development happens in the court, and when a strange person goes there, he has to have some idea. So jurors are a little bit prepared if they have orientation before going to court.
Okay. So exactly, we want to prepare them for what to expect in the courtroom. Anything else? What else should we be doing? Yes, back here. Oh, let me come back around. Yes?
People think they know what jury service is, and they don't want to come. They just don't want to be there. It doesn't matter what their good reasons are. They don't want to be there. So
okay, so it's trying to sort of turn around some of the attitudes that they might be coming in about what preconceived notions of what jury service might be involved. Anything else? What else are you trying to get accomplished here? Yes?
I think in our court, that's the only time that the clerk who summonses them has an opportunity to thank them.
Okay, so thanking people. You're here. You're a vital part of this court system for jury trials, and thank you for being here, for being part of this. You had one.
Just fairness. I think you're trying to develop a fair panel, and that's the idea, letting them know it's okay to talk about your biases or whatever they may be, your life experiences, so you can develop that fair.
Okay, so just sort of acknowledging of sort of what is your role as a juror? What is fairness? Are you appropriate? Are you a good juror for this particular type of case? Well, maybe not. However, there's another trial going on in the next courtroom over, and that one may be perfectly good for you. So we've got a couple of different things going on. But this whole idea of the importance of juror orientation, we've touched on some of them. One of them, people are kind of anxious. They're coming in for jury service. Often they don't know what to expect. Those of us who live in courts all the time understand this. I've got two mics going on. That's going to drive you crazy, isn't it? So let me just take care of that. So they're anxious. They don't know what will be expected of them. So even though you know this is pretty routine, nothing bad will happen, they don't necessarily know that. And so they want to address some of those issues. You certainly want to educate jurors about what their role is, what their responsibilities are. And so that's another piece of it. How about showing off your court? This may be the only time this year, this decade, in their life that this citizen is actually in your courthouse. Why not take a little bit of time to tell them the exciting stuff of what you're doing? How many judges do you have? How many cases were filed in your courthouse that get resolved? That gives you, it's a real nice intro in terms of the education of why it's important for you to be here. How many jury trials did your court do? Why is it that you're important there? And then just a little bit about sort of instilling some pride. The reason why you're here is you are part of the rule of law in our community. That's what your role is to be a partner with the judges, with the court staff. This is something that they should be proud of. So that's part of this role of orientation that we're trying to do. This is some of the things that are going on. So when does it start? When does orientation start?
When you send out the summons?
Bingo. Think broadly. Orientation is this idea of anything that you are communicating to jurors that they need to know. And that idea of sort of that first impression starts with the summons. So what's on your summons? Are you giving them clear, concise information? Or is it kind of confusing and a jumble? So that's one part of it. Today we're sort of very multimedia. The summons used to be the only sort of communication that took place until people would come in. But you might have an opportunity to talk with some jurors on the phone. If they call up and they have questions, maybe they need to defer their service to a more convenient date. So that telephone communication is part of orientation. How many of you have got a jury website as part of your court's website? All hands should be up. If you're not doing this, that should be job one when you get back. Information there. So what's on your website? What kind of information are you imparting to use to communicate with jurors, to educate jurors about their role, to calm their anxieties, to instill pride? So be thinking about this. Then you get they've actually shown up, and you've got them, that captive audience in the juror assembly room that you can talk with them about everything. And so that's obviously a big piece of it. I think that's the one that we normally think about juror orientation, is that 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 2 hours, 5 hours, that you've got them captive in the jury assembly room. So thinking about that and what that environment is like. Thinking not only what is the message that you're trying to give them that furthers those objectives that we talked about, but what are sort of the subliminal messages they're getting from what the staff are doing, sort of off stage, from what the room is like. How's your audio equipment? How's your video equipment? How comfortable are the chairs? Are you in sort of a bland room like this, or is there maybe some nice artwork? Games and diversion. If you're going to keep them there for 5 hours on a routine basis, I suggest you have things for them to do. And then finally, and this is, we usually think about sort of the handoff, if you're in jury management, the handoff up to the courtroom. But the courtroom is also part of orientation. But that's one that traditionally a trial judge is actually doing the orientation up there, and it's going to be very case specific and judge specific. So information about just the logistics of how they're going to do the jury selection process. What kind of case is this? What's the burden of proof? How are the judge and the lawyers going to be asking questions? So those are some that probably we don't typically think of, but it is part of orientation. Part of the, I think, challenge that a lot of court managers have had is when you think about all of the information that goes into jury orientation, when you're thinking this broadly, and there are lots of courts that have tried to do this where you kind of want to front load all of the information. There was a real tendency, I think, maybe it's just a reflection of what kind of, or the absence of technologies. We didn't have websites 50 years ago. For that matter, our telephones, some of them, that whole idea of sort of having a call-in where you could find out whether or not you needed to report or not, was kind of innovative 50 years ago. Now we're like going, duh. But so it used to be that everything went on the summons. And there really wasn't very much sort of personal interaction other than sort of when you reported in. And we're front-loading things. But think about sort of how things have changed today. Any of you sort of feel information overload on a regular basis? And hands up. Any of you who don't? Because I want whatever it is that you're taking, let me tell you. For jurors, part of the anxiety and part of the thing is, in terms of orientation, is ideally what you want to be doing is at each of these stages, you want to be giving jurors enough information to move forward to the next step with confidence. You don't need to let them know in the summons the information that they will need to know in the courtroom. You just need to get them enough information between the summons and supplemental website, telephone, enough to get them to the jury assembly room. And at that point, you can give them the information that they need to make it up to the courtroom. And once they're in the courtroom, the judge can give them the information that they need to move forward with the case. So think of the orientation of information at the right time, the right information at the right time to get jurors to move to the next step, so that you avoid that information overload. So what's the information in the jury summons? It's pretty clear. I mean, the basic stuff that you need in a jury summons, what? Jury service. When? Here's the date. Here's the time. Where? Here's the location. Here's the location of the courthouse. Here's the location of parking. That could be useful. Maybe if you're in a large urban area, information about public transportation. What's the nearest subway stop? What buses? Maybe if you're doing this in some sort of way of just sort of sending them to public transportation areas. What to do now? Respond to this summons. How many of you are one-step courts? So you've got the questionnaire and the summons all in one document. Okay. Two-step courts? Okay. Either way, so the most important thing is, tell us you got this summons or the questionnaire and respond. Answer, are you a citizen? Do you still live here? Any of that information. So that's the next thing you need to do. That's the next information. The next step, move with confidence. Answer this questionnaire. Mail it back. What to do then? Do you need to call in ahead of time? The night before? Do you need to bring your summons with you? Or just, is there a juror badge? Or some form of positive ID? Anything that they need to know in order to get into the courthouse. If you've got a no cell phones policy in your courthouse, let them know that. Because let me tell you, people are a little antsy about leaving their phones. So you need to let them know that just in time before they actually get there and say, I'm sorry, you can't bring that in. It was like, no, you take that from my cold dead hands. And then where to get other information? Telephone number. Website URL. That's really all the information that needs to go on a summons. It's been kind of interesting. One of the things that we've learned, it mostly came about because courts were trying to save money on printing and postage. And so a few courts around this country have actually started experimenting with, instead of doing like a full letter-size summons, or even like the 8.5 by 17, you know, and the multifold and the, you know, serrated and everything like that, doing a jury summons on a postcard. Literally, this big. Saves a lot on postage, saves on printing, but very little real estate to put information. And so your old summons that had, you know, all of this information, plus at least the citation, if not the actual statute of the jury law, and the penalties for failure to respond, and information for employers, and, you know, maybe a couple of other things, and a map, and most of it in like 0.4 font. You know, those of us have gotten to a certain age and we've got those progressive things, and you're like looking at it going, what? That's some of that information overload. And so a lot of the courts that have started going to a postcard summons had this very interesting thing. All they thought they were going to do was save a little bit of money, save a little bit of, you know, in terms of printing and postage. Actually got a higher response rate. And you know why? I think it's very counterintuitive. When you get sort of the old, big summons with all this information, that information overload, and you reach into the mailbox and you pull it out and you open it up and you get jury service, and it starts going through and it's 0.4 font and this and penalty. Okay, take it, it goes on the side of the desk. I'll deal with it later. It quickly gets covered up by the next thing that comes in that I don't want to deal with now. And so, 4-6 months later, clean it off the desk. I had jury service 4 months ago. That'll tell you something about also your follow-up on failures to appear. But with the postcards, people go out. You still sort of get that same initial reaction. I've got jury service. State to, you know, go to www, and they're literally walking from their mailbox with their phone and responding online. And once you've got that, get an email address, get a cell phone number, you know that they actually exist because they got the summons, you got them. Then you can start pushing the next information. Then you got them. But it's not sitting on a desk. So it's an interesting idea in terms of the summons. Keep it simple. Don't do that information overload, because I think today more than ever, people get sort of overwhelmed by this idea of jury service. Telephone. You know, one of the things I love working with jury people, because jury people are the best people in the world. You all know it if you're doing anybody, the folks that are working in, if you put them in jury, they will either last for like 4 weeks, and then they will run screaming back to the file room, please can't I just alphabetize files? Or they will be in jury for the rest of their career because they love it. They are the best people. They are friendly. They can talk anybody down who's like the most irate, irrational person in the world. And just, we're so glad you're here. And by the end of it, they are your best friend. You know this, right? And often you get that, and particularly in the telephone, that's where you need those skills most often. Partially because we've sort of forgotten about sort of that personal interaction. I mean, there are some times when I just really want to talk to a person, and the longer it takes me to do the IVR of, you know, press 4 if, you know, and press 6 if it's a Tuesday after 2 o'clock. Makes me crazy, and so by the time I actually get a human on the phone, I'm like, So think of that on that front end of who's calling in, and just think about the training for your staff of basic telephone courtesy. Answer the phone with a smile, because they're a citizen. They're a juror. They're a partner with you in the justice system. And so bringing that to that conversation and helping them out with whatever. Sure, it's a bad day, you need to defer your service. That's great. When would be good? I can put you out for 6 months. You're in retail sales and it's the holiday season, great. How about sometime in early February? That works really well. Do try and answer the phone promptly. If you're leaving a message, because I know sometimes it's just a message, make sure that somebody is actually checking those for messages, not leaving it all to the end of the day. Certainly not until the next day. Talk slowly. They're anxious. So calm them down and respect. The people who are calling deserve every bit of respect as the people who are walking in the door, as the people who are deliberating in your courthouse. Because it's setting the stage, giving them information. Websites. Question for you, those of you who've got websites. Is there a way to get from your home page to the jury information that's obvious? One click? Yay, good. That's really important. Be thinking about that, because that's one that if you're just kind of trying to navigate through a website of how do you get there, of being able to find the jury information fairly easily. We've actually gotten pretty good in courts of putting lots of information up about our courts, and that's actually a good thing, but it can sometimes be overwhelming. And so thinking about how many clicks, and then thinking about what's the information. How are you using your website? How many of you, the functionality on your website now allows it to interface and they can actually respond to a summons online? A number of you, good. So that information of, are you a citizen? Are you still a resident? Are you over the age of 18? Do you need to do a name or address change? Do you need to defer your service? What if you actually can't serve? You need to be excused. You're terminally ill. You're taking care of an infant. Whatever the issue is that you want to be excused from jury service. Is that clearly there on that website? Then frequently asked questions, maybe some other information about the court. Now, that's one that you actually need to be a little bit careful of in terms of your website. Once you get to the jury information, how many clicks from that over to the part of your court where you've got information about cases, especially public information where you can access cases? We've all had the problem with the Googling juror, right? My stepmother, wonderful woman, got summoned for jury service in federal court in Portland, Maine, a couple of years ago. And she's a good, upstanding citizen, and she wanted to be prepared. And so she called me on Sunday night. She said, oh, Paula, I'm really excited. I'm going in tomorrow morning. I've been on the website. There's two drug cases and something else. And I'm like, oh, please, just plea bargain, call off the trials, please. Because she wants to be a good juror. If she had known that PACER exists, she would have read like the indictment, every motion that was filed in all 3 cases. She wants to be a good juror and be prepared. And so we've got this real kind of ironic problem with our websites that we just need to be aware of. That we want the public to get more and more information. We want to be transparent. We want to be accessible. except for this small cohort of the public that are jurors, in which case we want to basically wrap them in bubble wrap and keep them in a dark room. And so just be thinking about that on your website of how is it intuitive that people would go and say, oh, and I want to learn more about the court, and I want to learn more about the cases, and what kind of cases are set for trial on the day that I'm supposed to appear, because it could be something exciting, and I want to be prepared. So think about your website. What's the information that the jurors want to know? What's the information that you want them to know? And make that real easy to find. But other stuff that you don't want them to know? There are limits on what you can do. If it's available for the public, it's available for the jurors, but you don't necessarily need to make it easy or intuitive for them to get there. Okay. So next, you get them there. They show up in the morning, and they're checking in. What does your jury assembly room look like? Because this is sort of the environment in which you're going to be communicating additional information, the information that they really need to make it from the assembly room up to the courtroom, so that they're prepared once they walk into the courtroom. And you don't want them distracted, and you also don't want to undermine your own message. If we're talking about jury service is this really important part of the justice system, you don't want them in a room that's crowded or dirty or insufficient seating, because it's distracting and it's kind of demeaning. So think about this, sort of when you're thinking about your court facilities and especially your jury facilities, clean. Sometimes, you know, your sort of staff is sort of back in the back office and you come out and you do your orientation and then you go back. I really encourage you to, you know, either you if you're a jury manager or your court staff, to just periodically go out and walk through the assembly room. Is there trash on the floor? When was the last time the walls were painted? How about restrooms? If you've got, I remember being at a site visit with a colleague of mine once in a court that shall not be named, and we'd gotten to a break in the morning and sort of asked to use the restrooms, and the folks there said, oh, well, use the staff restrooms. You don't want to use the jury restrooms. They're gross. Clean the restrooms. Get maintenance to clean the restrooms. So think about this. Just kind of walk through. If you were coming in here cold, is this someplace that you would like to be? Is this someplace that you would be proud to be contributing your tax dollars? So that's one. Adequate seating. There should be seating for everybody. If you've got standing room only, you're summoning too many people. Think of other solutions, you know, staggered check-in, do something else, but you got to have enough seats. There should never be standing room only. And comfortable. These are okay. But you know, nothing broken, certainly not folding metal chairs. This is something worth investing in. If you're using videos, unobstructive video. So if you're sitting over in that, if you can't see this one, you should be able to see this one. So sort of looking around your room. Your audio system. Is it well functioning, or is it just kind of like static? So thinking about that technology, because this is information that you're trying to communicate that's important to them. If they can't see the video, if they can't hear clearly, they're going to miss the information. And then another one, particularly if you're in a court where there's some waiting, reasonable access to food and beverages. If you've got like some coffee or some vending machines there, that's great. Some court, and anyone still here, like, sort of the donuts or cookies in the assembly room, or is that just in the deliberation room? Or are we like so far past that? Sometimes. It's Juror Appreciation Week. Okay. But this is sort of the idea that if, for a couple of reasons, you want to sort of keep them there so that you've got them as needed to send them up to courtrooms. And so if they have to leave the jury assembly room, it's hard to get them back. They're wandering around the courthouse. Who are they interacting with, potentially? Who else is in the courthouse? Witnesses, defendants, media. If you've got them in the assembly room, you've got a little bit of control on that. If they're out kind of wandering around to get to the court cafeteria, that's fine, but you do have to sort of be somewhat worried about that, particularly if they have to leave the security perimeter. So reasonable access to food and beverages. They should certainly be allowed to have food and beverages in the assembly room. Nice touches. Just kind of games, diversions, things like that. But this is actually one of the things that you can do, particularly if your jurors are waiting for any period of time, is you can sort of do this subliminal information that further enhances sort of some of your objectives of jury service. What about using artwork to talk about your local community, your courthouse, your bench? Here in Virginia, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Loving v. Virginia. So wouldn't that be great to have like a poster and a description of that case? Nothing like, bad law on a local level made good. I remember in Maricopa County, before they got their new courthouse in their old jury assembly room, they had there was some wonderful case law that came out of Arizona. I think Gideon, right to counsel, was there. And so you had big artwork sort of talking about that. Talking about sort of what is it that courts do. Other things, just local attractions. Things about their community that might be interesting for them to know. So I think those are nice touches. And to the extent that you can tie it in of sort of pride in community, pride in the justice system, is a really nice technique. All right, so you've got them there. They're comfortable. They've got some bottled water. We're all happy. So what are you gonna tell them? I'm going to say some general guidelines. Keep it upbeat. Keep it friendly. Two things that I've sat through a lot of juror orientations, some of which have been great. There's a couple of them that they were definitely, this was prepping for Night at the Improv. Comedy Central. Not. This upbeat, friendly, fallen down, humorous is okay, but this should not be Comedy Central. Because the citizens are here for a serious purpose. And if you're making too many jokes, you're undermining that message. This is not a joke. This is important. Upbeat and friendly, thank you, is a really good message. This may have been this, hopefully it was just idiosyncratic with this one judge. Had a judicial greeting in one court that I watched. And he came down and immediately went on a tirade about people not fulfilling their civic duty and needing to be more responsible. And I'm sitting there going, Judge, wrong calendar. That's the order to show cause calendar on Thursday. These are people who are here. Don't scold. This is not the time for scolding and fussing at irresponsible citizens. You say thank you, because they're good citizens. They might not have wanted to be there. They may still have some serious reservations about being there, but they're there, and you say thank you. Brief and to the point. You've got about 20 minutes of attention span on a typical adult today. All right, honesty. How many of you have zoned out at least once since I started talking? Come on, stop lying. You're all liars. Those with the hands down, you're all liars. If your orientation is taking longer than 20 minutes, you will lose people. And so think about what, again, back to that thing of what do they need to know? Not sort of superfluous stuff. What do they need to know? Do make it cohesive. I've been in a couple of orientations where they start and they do something, and then they stop, and then they show a video, and then they start up again and they do something else, and then they stop and they send jurors who meet these qualifications to go over on that side, and people are moving around the room. It's very distracting. And once you've broken that concentration, it's really hard to get it back. And so one of the things that you want to do is to think about the logic and the progression and not break it up. Judicial greeting is great. For some of you, probably too often, it's the only judge they'll see all day if they don't make it out of a courtroom, out of the jury assembly room and up to a courtroom. So that's actually a nice touch. Do talk with your judges about, first of all, these general things. Upbeat, don't scold, wrong calendar, judge. Length of time, general message. And having a judge there is fine. Other than that, no other outsiders. I was in one court one time, and they actually had the chief of court security come in and do like a half-an-hour lecture on court security and all the things they're doing to keep citizens safe and what you should do and not which hallways you shouldn't go down. And you running for re-election, sheriff? What? No. That's court security. Court needs to be paying attention to juror security. You do not need to be lecturing the jurors about that. So really try to minimize sort of outsiders from coming in. Court staff, judges, that's it. Things to avoid. First of all, if it's either very untimely, if you've got multiple courthouses around your county that people could have been summoned for, and so they might have gone to a more convenient courthouse, but they're here now, don't tell them about that missed opportunity. It's too late. Just know. That should have been on the website, on the summons, part of telephone communication. They don't need to know about it in orientation. If you have, how many of you have grand juries? Good. You don't need to talk about grand juries in your petit jury orientation. Do a separate grand jury orientation. Same principles apply, but people get like real confused. So am I here for petit jury? Am I here for grand jury? Oaths and admonitions. Really interesting case out of Connecticut a few years ago. Yeah, it's almost a decade now. Connecticut v. It's very French. Leroux, I think was how it's pronounced. It's actually with their statewide juror orientation video. had some sort of seemingly bland statements about the law, and particularly about burden of proof and presumption of innocence, sort of things that would normally sort of roll off people's tongues, until it actually was challenged as being an incorrect statement of the law. Went up to the Connecticut Supreme Court and they said, what goes in the video, or if any kind of admonitions that are going on during orientation, those are jury instructions. They have the weight of jury instructions. And if you get it wrong, it's subject to reversal in this trial. So do be careful of this with your staff. You don't want to be confusing the jurors. If it's things about jury instructions, admonitions, things to do or not do, unless you are absolutely positively sure that this is a correct statement of the law, generally applicable no matter what case you're in. Civil, criminal, misdemeanor, juvenile. You should not be mentioning that in the jury assembly room. Leave that to the judge. That's orientation up in the courtroom. Voir dire procedures. I think it's probably okay to talk sort of generally about sort of you'll go up in this jury selection, you know, the judge will ask questions, maybe the attorneys will ask questions. It's important that you be honest, forthcoming. But one of the things I've found is that voir dire, that is idiosyncratic to every judge. Every judge does it differently, even within the same courthouse. And so it's really hard unless you are a jury person in a one-judge courthouse and you were just in watching them do voir dire last week. You don't know how that judge is going to do voir dire. And they might change it based on the case. So other than some very, very brief overview information, let the judge explain how he or she is going to do voir dire. Explanations about waiting time. How many of you jurors are waiting for a while? You know, lots of you. I've seen this happen a few places where you want to sort of keep jurors informed. You know, well, we've got 4 cases on the calendar today, and we hope to be sending up a panel, you know, sometime soon. But you do need to be careful about sort of what's the explanation for the delay. One of them, well, they're working on a plea. Is there a problem with that particular statement? What would the problem be? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, nothing like prejudging the thing. So, you know, oh, well, the plea didn't happen, so we're going to let you try this case anyway. So be very sort of cautious about what you're telling jurors for any delays. It's nice to keep them informed. Tell them about, you know, okay, we're going to be leaving for lunch at, I'm going to cut you loose for lunch at 11:30. I'll need you back by 1. But that's probably as much as you need to tell them. And the last one, I would hope that I wouldn't have to say this. You know, there's some occasions that you really kind of enjoy a lot of formality. But for the purposes of jury orientation, it's more important that they actually get the information that they need. Got my list of horror stories. In a southern court, it would have to be in the South. So going through and sort of got everybody checked in and everybody there, and if everyone will please rise, and while the deacon from the First Baptist Church will lead us in a moment of prayer. Okay, we'll do that. Speaking with the chief judge later, and going, Judge, did you know that they're doing this? So, yeah, that's probably not appropriate. So that's part. I mean, it's sort of like, you know, as long as there are exams in school, there will be prayer in schools. As long as jurors are deliberating, there will probably be prayers, but we don't need to lead them. So what do they need to know? Term of service. How long are you here for? What to expect during the day? Are you here for today? Are you here for a week? Privacy policies. Qualifications, if you need to do any more pre-screening. Is everybody here a citizen? Yes. Over 18, yes. If you need to do some last-minute deferrals, great. Information about employers. Compensation. How much will you be paid and when? That when is important. Parking. Mostly, this is sort of those untimely bit that presumably they know they've gotten there and they're parked somewhere. And it should have been on the website of where is juror parking. But for other ones, if you're parked in the street and it's one of the drop your quarters in, you might want to move. So that's actually important information for jurors to know. Any emergency procedures? How do you exit the building? Particularly important if those of you in like earthquake-prone areas, or hurricanes or tornadoes, where should jurors go? Is there sort of an area that is sort of a common meeting place? So thinking about those emergency procedures that they ought to know. And then any courthouse policies about where jurors can go in the courthouse, about cell phone use. You can use your devices here in the jury assembly room, but when you're leaving, we're going to ask you to shut them off, not put them on silent, shut them off. And explaining sort of what is the policy. Do you all have like a court-wide policy on electronic devices? Is it written down, or is it just kind of like passed from person to person?
Written down. It's
written down, okay. So it's written down, passed from person to person. Does everybody in the jury office know what those policies are? Okay, good. That's an important one. I've been in a couple of courts where it's like, yeah, well, we think this is a policy. Is it written down anywhere? Yeah, no, it's not a policy unless it's written down. Does everybody know what it is? Are you communicating the same information? And then the last thing I would just say is this whole experience of jury service and the education that jurors need. I mean, it's a great time to actually educate jurors about the justice system, but let the process be the education. There's only so much you can front load and sort of give it as an academic way. Let the process be. But that means that you have to also have the court moving. If you're in a court and you bring jurors in day after day, and they never leave the jury assembly room because the trials are being canceled, because there's a plea or there's a settlement or there's a continuance. No, I know it's not a jury problem. That's more sort of a lens. We talk about it in terms of jury utilization. And it's not really a lens on the jury staff. It's a lens on the trial bench and how well they are doing pre-trial preparation. But if you're getting sort of the pictures here of jury duty, the wait, and the wait, and the wait, if that's the experience for your jurors, you're not giving them the best education they could because they're not actually getting the education that comes from serving. So talk with your bench. Summon fewer jurors, talk with your bench about managing their dockets better so that you can call jurors off. Don't disrupt their lives if they don't need to be there. When you bring them in, get them oriented, and get them up to the courtroom where they can really experience how great this thing is of jury service is firsthand, instead of sitting and waiting all day. So that's sort of my take. Questions? Yes, over here. Let me get the mic there. Up, 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 up. So, questions?
Yes. My question was that you were talking about information overload.
Mm-hmm.
We do provide the juror orientation video on the website.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so if a juror is optionally looking at it, is that okay? Is that not? Because it explains everything that they're going to go through that day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, meaning, and even shows them how they go to the court, how the bailiff's going to call them in, that sort of thing. So is that a bad thing?
Oh, no. No, that's actually a great thing. Did you? I'm not even sure this was on, so I apologize about that. It's actually great if you can put your juror orientation, if it's digitized, put it up on the website with a link. You know, you can upload it to YouTube, you can upload it to Vimeo, wherever you want to put it. Maybe your court actually has its own YouTube channel. That's a great idea. That overload of hearing it too many times. I mean, if they've already watched it online, great. You know, they can zone out during the video. You know, but that is for people who are interested. That's just fine. That's just fine. Okay, other questions? Yes? Okay, I've got it on this time.
I just have more of a statement. So I have 2 jury clerks that are from our criminal division, and they've been like our little experts for like 5 years. And then it dawned on me from, just teaching and just, coming to these things, I need to get other people cross-trained. So I started getting more cross-trained, and as luck would have it, they both were out within 2 months, and one is still out. And it's been 5 months already. So I think that there's a danger sometimes if you just have, 2 or 3 that are trained all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that idea of thinking, how do you do your cross-training with your jurors and with the other court staff, if you need to bring them in just to supplement your staff, but also if you're, actually, it's very useful for other staff to know what goes on in the jury office. What are you in the jury office telling jurors? When I'm doing judge training, I actually encourage judges, especially new judges, come out of your chambers, take your robe off, and go sit in the back. Take a look at the summons, because that's the orientation that jurors have when they're arriving in your courtroom. And so encouraging other staff or cross-training around the court, I think, is a great idea. Good. Other questions, comments? Go.
In our courts, juror feedback is important. So what we do is if jurors have served or have sat in a trial, we do a jury exit questionnaire to get some feedback on what their experience was like. What we don't do for the jurors that never make it into the courtroom, we don't ask the same questions. Is it recommended, or is it something that you probably have like a suggestion box in your jury assembly room, so that if they wanted to just write a note on what their experience was like, in the waiting process, do other courts do that, and is that something that is practical? How many of you routinely do juror exit questionnaires? Okay. And are you doing just the jurors that are actually selected, or is it everybody who walks through the door? Everybody? Good. Yeah, I think that it's actually important, partially because, first of all, jurors actually have great information. Some of the best suggestions of like stupid stuff that you might not have noticed, jurors will bring to your attention, and it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you for bringing that. But also, as people go through the process, you sort of get that they've forgotten what the experience was like in terms of whatever anxiety that they experienced in the assembly room, or maybe they weren't selected for a trial and then they were let go from there. And most jurors, not all jurors, some jurors have a bad experience in service because it was like a really awful trial, or or deliberations were particularly difficult. But most jurors come out of the process and they're so much more impressed with the court. How many of you have gotten like letters from that, from former jurors? Yeah. If you're not, you got to think about stepping up your game, because that's actually sort of the overwhelming impression that I get from jurors.
But they do sometimes forget the ones that go through that process and have that really positive experience. Sometimes have forgotten of, you know, the chewing gum on the floor in the assembly room was like, you know, somebody come by and pick that up. So things like that would be useful to know. So it's make sure you're getting everybody, but you're also probably going to hear different things from different cohorts depending upon how far along in the process they went. Other questions, comments? One more. I'll even turn it on this time. Woohoo!
Well, you have, you said about privacy policy. So I never heard of that for jurors. So how does that work? And, you know, usually you get something, you say, okay, we've notified you, this is your privacy policy, but first time hearing that.
Well, it depends. What is private information in your court? What information has been provided to the judge or will be provided to the attorneys? So if you're in a court, for example, that you routinely don't use names, you use your ID number in the courtroom, and that's the information that goes up. And that may be sort of a regular policy that your court has, but it's good to explain to the jurors that, you know, it's not meant to be disrespectful, that we're calling you by juror number 316. What we're trying to do is just, you know, protect your security, protect your privacy, and, you know, and this is how to do it. And once jurors sort of understand the rationale for that, but jurors are, I mean, the whole thing with privacy today, because so much information is out there, and so you kind of say, well, okay, if all the information is out there on Facebook and things like that, well, that's one, if I have information and I've put it on Facebook for folks that are my friends on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that's information that I chose to share, but I didn't give the court information to share other information. And so having a sense of sort of what information gets shared to the courtroom. Maybe you asked for an accommodation because you have some type of medical condition. That's fine, but that's not necessarily information that needs to be shared outside of other than with the judge and the courtroom staff. So things like that are just thinking, what are the privacy policies that you should be informing jurors about what you're doing to protect their personal information, and what information actually will get shared with the judge and with the attorneys because it's actually relevant to what they need to do in the courtroom.
Yeah, they asked the question, why do we have to give you all this information? Why do you know where I work? Why do you know my mouth?
Yeah. So thinking about that, of just explaining that, I think is actually really important for that purpose. Other questions, comments? Okay, yes.
Thank you for such a great presentation. I have a question. You mentioned something about juror utilization. Many times in my courts, we try to estimate how many jurors we're going to need to call in on Monday. And on Monday, cases go away, you know, for whatever reason. And we end up with, sometimes we release on Mondays about sometimes 40 jurors, sometimes as much as 100 jurors. Is there any way, we have a guideline that tells us to calculate it at about 65% of, you know, for show rates and things like that. Is there any way that we can kind of improve on that?
Okay, this is a question in terms of how do you anticipate what the actual demand for jurors is going to be on any given day? It's hard. I will tell you it is very hard. And it's one of those issues that's kind of dynamic, because if your judges are doing a better job of communicating with the lawyers, you know, the Friday before, is this case really going on Monday morning, or are you still talking about a settlement? Because I don't want to bring the jurors in unnecessarily. It costs you money, it disrupts their lives. So that's sort of a discussion that you need to have with the bench of, you know, judges, if you can do a better job of that, then I can save us money. You know, I'm sure, believe me, I've been with courts where I've like going in, do you realize you could save like $1 million a year if you stopped bringing in jurors and not using them? So that's part of the discussion, the communication with the judges. Sometimes the judges know the case isn't going forward, but it doesn't actually get back down to the jury office, and so you're like, so that's actually the ideal way of handling that. And if you've got a bench that's open to sort of changing and doing a better job sort of on the front end, that's great. On the back end, it's more dangerous, and I would make sure that you are talking to your chief judge about this, is sometimes just do the numbers. On any given Monday, the maximum number of people I have ever needed was X. Sort of, I know that on any given Monday, we've got 10 trials scheduled, and I've never needed them for more than 7, because 3 of them will always disappear. And so you summon for 7. And you will probably have the day, but it might take a couple of years when 8 of them are going to go. And you're going to be scrambling, and you're going to be recycling jurors, and that's where you want to have your chief judges back, because it's going to be an ugly day. But you can say, but by doing this, and if you're saying, you know, I've managed to not disrupt and save X number of dollars, if we run short once every couple of years, Judge, is that worth it to have saved this amount of money and to be that more respectful of our jurors' time? But take that one cautiously. All right, how are we doing on time?
10:16.
I'm over time. All right, thank you all very much. Enjoy the exhibition.